All right, well, we can get started as people continue to roll in. I want to introduce myself. I'm going to be the esteemed moderator of this incredible event with some of my very good friends who I will introduce in a moment. My name is Benji Backer. I'm the president and founder of the American Conservation Coalition. We're delighted to be hosts, co-hosts with Mainstream Republicans of Washington for this incredible event. In my background, it's a beautiful sunset here in Ballard, Washington that is probably pretty similar tonight, but I am not there in this moment. I started ACC as a freshman at the University of Washington, and I was inspired to start what is now the largest conservative grassroots environmental organization in the country because of the leadership of pioneers in this state that have really gone down quietly as the best environmentalists this country has ever seen. And their names are names like Dan Evans, Slade Gorton, Ralph Monroe, people who have really pioneered the future or the past environmentalism, and yet have kind of left their legacy in a very quiet way, and oftentimes is not known by our generation. And when I joined the Mainstream Republicans of Washington board, in addition to ACC, about a year ago, one of the main things that I told the board, and they have really, dutifully gone with me on, is how we can take this message of common sense environmentalism to younger communities and to the rest of the state in a way that showcases how conservative principles work and how we can move forward on these issues together as a conservative movement, and also bridge divides where possible with the left, because this state is too beautiful to let the partisan politics get in the way, and it's too beautiful to let these issues continue to slide down the line. And as we've seen throughout the course of history, Republican principles can work. It's very important that they are at the forefront of our society today, and that's why we're having this event tonight. The Mainstream Republicans of Washington, for those who don't know, it's a nonprofit organization here in Washington State that really fosters the traditional conservative values that inspired people like me to be active in the conservative movement, and trying to apply those traditional conservative values to the issues that matter most to this state. It's an incredible organization. So if you haven't joined, make sure to check out the website, which Aaron can put in the chat. Aaron McCoy, the executive director of Mainstream, and really hope that you'll join Mainstream Republicans of Washington and ACC after this fruitful discussion. Before I introduce the panelists, one more thing before we get started is that Mainstream Republicans of Washington has decided to make this year a year where we focus a lot on conservative principles as it pertains to the environment. As we've seen over the past couple of years, Democrats have had control of this state's House and Senate, and there still hasn't been anything done on the environment. Emissions continue to rise. The environment continues to be kind of pushed on the back burner, but yet in the dialogue, it's being, by this governor and by others, it seems like it's being tackled. And the reality is my generation, the Gen Z and millennial generation, deserve better than that. We deserve better than just the rhetoric that has kind of encapsulated what is known as climate change here in the state, or environmental action. There hasn't been action. There hasn't been real results. And it's actually one of the states that's lagging the most in terms of environmental protection. So tonight, we're going to dive into how we got there and how we can get out of that kind of stagnation with conservative principles that can guide us to a better future. So to do that, I want to introduce three of the most important leaders in this fight in the state. First, Jesse Jensen, who is the 2020 congressional candidate in the Washington 8th Congressional District. He's a good friend of mine and somebody who put climate change and the environment on his platform, which really helped him outperform other Republicans even in the Washington 8th Congressional District, because he was able to apply conservative principles to an issue that matters so much to that congressional district. He's a fellow young conservative who feels that this is a really important issue, and I know he's going to use this as an opportunity to continue fostering an environmental dialogue going forward. We also have Caleb Heimlich, the chairman of the Washington Republican Party, another person who has done an amazing job of putting the environment at the forefront of this state's Republican Party, and has made it a priority throughout his time as the chairman of the Washington Republican Party. And we have Jacquelin Maycumber, who's a representative from the 7th Legislative District. Jacquelin has spoken at a lot of mainstream events and ACC events about how we can turn the principles that conservatives have in rural and urban areas and turn that into real policy changes at the state level. And she's championed a lot herself. So I'm excited to introduce each one of them. And I want to give them both, or all three of them, an opportunity to start with some opening remarks. Then we'll dive into some great questions and what is going to be a great panel. So Jesse, kick us off.
Well, Benji, thank you for the warm introduction, the kind words, and all the support and all the work that you're doing. I think that, we need more leaders like you and ACC that are going to take this fight into the future. And I think that, one of the big themes of my campaign and of any future endeavors that I may take in the future going forward is one of servant leadership. I think that, no matter what your background in the conservative sphere, whether you're a Christian conservative or a fiscal conservative, it just makes sense to take care of the environment. We need to be good stewards of our planet. Christ spoke about in the Bible. And if you're a fiscal conservative and you're thinking about investing in ExxonMobil, you want to make sure that they're going to be investing in carbon capture. So, at its core, conservatism is one of freedom and efficiency, and all about figuring out what incentives are going to drive the free market to solve these big, hairy problems. And I know that we can tackle it, and I'm looking forward to the discussion tonight. So thanks again, Benji, for the opportunity.
Of course, Caleb.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Thank you, Benji and Mainstream, for putting this event on. I'm looking forward to chatting with some great panelists. I really respect, obviously, Jesse Jensen, who ran a great race in 2020, came this close to winning and serving in Congress, and would be a huge upgrade over Kim Schreier. So I know the future is very bright for Jesse, and big fan of Jacquelin Maycumber and all the work that she and her colleagues are doing down in Olympia. I just come at this from a very practical standpoint. For us to win in Washington State, as we're looking ahead to 2022 and trying to be a governing majority party, we have to be addressing an issue that over 2/3 of the voters care deeply about. And so just practically for the Republican Party, for our candidates, we need to be pragmatic. We need to offer real solutions. We need to hold this governor accountable, who likes to talk big on a lot of things, but not deliver results. And so I think this issue is a great opportunity. About 10 years ago, it was Republicans that really championed the issue of education in Washington State. And that's how we got to the MCC. And when Republicans had the majority in the Senate, we funded education at levels that had never been reached under decades of Democrat control. And I think we can bring that same approach to the environment when we talk about actual delivering tangible results, something that we haven't seen under the governor and under the Democrat control right now. So I think this is a great opportunity for us to really bring new people into the party, to stand on the shoulders of giants and the legacy we have in Washington State of conservation. So I'm proud to be here tonight with all of you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Caleb. And Jacquelin?
State Representative Jacquelin Maycumber. I'm the House Republican floor leader. I am excited to be here tonight. Environmental policy has not just turned into environmental policy, but it's been used and weaponized in the legislature and in politics. And I really appreciate what Caleb said when he mentioned, really what Republicans have taken the lead in policy when you talk about education, but also environmental policy. And Benji, you mentioned some great names of people who have really done amazing things in the state of Washington as Republicans in their position of leadership that have changed the way we've looked at the state of Washington, including parks and other amazing things with our natural resources. And really we need to make sure that we focus on, Republicans took the lead on protecting our natural resources like our forests right away. We've been having this conversation for many years. We need to fireproof our forests. We really need to look at that. And now we're having the conversations that is important, not just for the forest itself, not for carbon emissions, but also the ecosystem. We're losing whole forests and they're burning hot, and you really just don't see that habitat. And Republicans took the lead on that. Republicans are taking the lead on innovation and cross-laminated timber. I mean, we have in my district one of the first and great cross-laminated timber productions, Russ Vaughan, and with Vaughan Timbers. And so you really see those Republican ideas and innovation really making things happen. And it is the environment. It is environmental policy. It's not cloaked with something else, not cloaked with taxation and going after a certain group of people. And it's really talking about exactly what it is, and that's environmental policy.
Well, that's exactly right. And I can't wait to dive into some of the solutions that you just mentioned too, like cross-laminated timber and innovation, as well as forest management. I think we're going to cover a lot of those topics in this short time that we have together. But one of the things that we always forget to do when talking about the environment is talk about our personal connection to it and how we're worried about it within our own backyards. It's always seemingly this big global issue, which it is all the time, but we can't connect to something that is thousands of miles away when there is something happening in our backyards or in our homes. And so one of the first questions that I wanted to ask each of you was, what environmental issue are you the most worried about? And also, why does it matter so much to you? So I'll start with you, Jacquelin, if you may, and then go back the other way.
Well, I've been blessed enough to be raised in some of the best natural resources in the world, and more of the rural area, and that's the 7th District. I would fight anyone who says it's not the most beautiful district in the state of Washington. So I've had that benefit, and being married to my husband, who was raised a farmer and is still a farmer, he's shown me, trees that his parents, while they were married, wrapped together, and they grew together. And they've both passed when he was young, but he has those trees and he can talk about that. My children take personal responsibility of the land around us, whether we own it or not. If there's trash, they pick it up. And there's some value to that personal responsibility of the environment around you. And that is how I was raised, and that is how you see our community being raised. Those are things that are being lost right now, that it's somebody else's issue, that's somebody else's problem. That personal responsibility, if you throw things out your window around here, we're going to find out who it is, right? We were going to pick up that trash, take care of it. And that's what we talk about. We come together as a community and really talk about the value of moving forward and protecting those natural resources. So having that ability to be raised that way, and then going and getting a degree in biochemistry is taking that natural environment and making that something that is a part of you too, that you value that responsibility. So that is the way I look at it in the legislature.
Yeah, I would say, well, I grew up in Puyallup, Washington, which is the most beautiful city in the state of Washington. And growing up in the shadow of Mount Rainier, and now raising my 3 kids there, I'm really passionate about preserving our natural beauty in our state, and really the recreation opportunities that go along with that, the health that provides to our community as we're experiencing tremendous growth in the Puget Sound, in King County, Snohomish County, Pierce County, but making sure that we're prioritizing recreation opportunities in parks. I'm privileged to serve on the Parks and Recreation Board in Pierce County. It's not always as fun as the TV show, but it's a great opportunity to serve your community. I've met some great people and really invested in parks right in Pierce County. And so for me, similar to Jacquelin, it's about the next generations of Washingtonians. It's about my kids and our constituents' kids and people in this state, making sure that we're preserving this great natural environment that we're blessed to live in, and keeping that at the local level.
Well, those are 2 fantastic answers to follow up on. I am a transplant. The Army brought me to beautiful Washington State, and I started rock climbing in Exit 38. I've climbed Mount Rainier 3 times and summited twice. And I always say, and I've said this on the campaign trail before I was on the campaign trail, I want the glacier to be there when my kids are old enough to climb Rainier with me. So I would echo, I think, what Caleb and Jacquelin both said. But for me specifically, and you alluded to it earlier, Benji, it's forest fires, right? I think that we've seen just dramatic mismanagement of our forests. You can't mismanage forests forever and then not manage forests for 50 years and wonder why you have these massive forest fires. And, I think as of September, University of Montana put out that we've seen 5 million acres of forest burned on the West Coast in the United States in 2020 as of September. And if you talk to climate scientists from the University of Stanford, you've got Professor Diffenbaugh, who describes climate change as with a baseball analogy. So if you think of a 3-run home run in baseball occurring, the proximate cause for that score is the home run, right? It's the guy actually hitting the ball out of the park. But climate change is putting those runners on base, right? So in our instance, you may have a poorly managed utility in California that's creating a spark. That's the proximate cause. But, climate change is making these things worse, right? And you're getting these massive, massive forest fires. So I think that we need to recognize that. We need to deal with it. We need to have better forest management. And I think that that impacts everything, right? I've got a 9-month-old, a 4-year-old, and a 2-year-old. And when we have these massive fires in California, I can't take them outside because the air quality is so poor. And you're also running the risk of burning out, the beautiful 8th Congressional District, the Forestry Management Training Center there at Exit 38, and just the knock-on impacts are legion. So, we need to do everything that we can. We need to be planting trees. We need to be taking better care of the environment. And I'm sure we'll discuss it further, but we need to be applying conservative ideals of freedom, efficiency, and free market capitalism to influence and create the innovation that we need and deregulate some other industries so that these things can flourish and that we can save our planet.
Well, I really liked all 3 of those answers because they hit on 2 kind of key themes that I think are missing from the environmental dialogue, and that's nuance, which you touched on, Jesse, with the forest fire issue, which is that it's lack of forest management and climate change, and you've got Americans trying to say that it's one or the other when it's both, and then you also had the personal connections of where you grew up or where you went hiking or where you went climbing or how you want to protect the environment for your kids and grandkids. Those are the sorts of things that we are missing from this dialogue so desperately and that are needed. And I think that that's also something that conservatives can champion. And so to get into that a little bit and starting to get into that nitty gritty discussion a little bit, why do you think, Jesse, to start with you, conservative values work for the environment? And not just how do they work, but how do you want those values to be applied going forward?
That's a great question, Benji. Thank you for it. Conservatism at its core is about freedom and efficiency. I love the Ronald Reagan quote, the 9 scariest words in the English language is I'm here from the government and I'm here to help, right? We just see that time and time again, government interaction, it's slow to react. There aren't incentives. We know a lot about economics. Incentives matter, right? And so we need to have an incentive structure that will allow companies, the free market, to innovate. There's Scott Walker, Governor Walker, I think, had the best analogy for socialism versus conservatism that I've ever heard. It revolves around hailing a cab. Socialism is the old yellow taxi. And hail a taxi cab in South Clayellum or Enumclaw at midnight when it's raining, or in Jacquelin's district in the 7th, right? It's just not going to happen. Imagine, though, hitting a button and magically a driver comes up, and that's Uber, and that's conservatism, right? That's free market innovation. That's incentive structure. That's supply and demand meeting one another and coming together. You can take that analogy further, though, and see the downside of capitalism. If you're in a wheelchair, Uber doesn't do great for you, right? There aren't a lot of paratransit Uber cars that are out there. And so you do sometimes need to put a little bit of safety guardrails around it. And, I've said time and time again, one of my favorite, Theodore Roosevelt, right? The guy that created the national park system, the one that's preserved all these beautiful things for our future generations in this country. You need to make a system where you're creating incentives for the free market and you're making sure that you've got these guardrails. So what does that mean? To your point, what should it look like? This means removing red tape. You've got they can take small modular reactors. These are nuclear power reactors that don't require as much concrete, that they're non-nuclear waste things, so you can export them to places like China, and they're not going to be able to produce energy to use. This means getting out of the way of fracking had incredible results. It's led to a 20% reduction. We become independent, right? So you need to remove a lot of the red tape, but at the same time, you need to create an incentive structure that will enable companies to innovate. And you see it in where they're being forced by the free market to invest in carbon capture technologies, because if they won't, they're going to continue to see their stock price decline, right? And so you look at the Green New Deal and how that's just going to destroy the environment. It's going to be really, really bad for floor leader Maycumber's district or constituents, right? It's really going to negatively impact rural areas. And so in a lot of ways, we just need to get out of the way and let innovation take over, but we need to do so in a thoughtful way with the adequate guardrails.
Absolutely, Caleb.
Yeah, I would agree with obviously all of that. The two things I would kind of add is number one is accountability. I think Republicans are always about accountability and making sure that a program is actually achieving its intended goals. And so what we often see with our friends on the other side of the aisle is these lofty ambitions, and then the results don't match up with what they're talking about. And so I think Republicans bring that perspective of actually holding government accountable. And the second one is kind of a cost benefit analysis. And I think, Benji, you hit on this in talking about nuance, but all too often in the environmental debate and when we're talking about climate change, you have Governor Inslee basically saying, if you don't do this, then you want to destroy the earth. And there's no concept of, well, what's the cost benefit analysis of this policy? What is that going to do in terms of jobs? What are the consequences, sometimes unintended, sometimes intended, of these policies? And I think Republicans definitely bring that, conservatives bring that to the important piece of this debate of saying, let's focus on achieving real results. Let's use innovation. Let's use incentives. Let's get to where we need and want to be. But let's also be careful about what those unintended consequences are of all of our actions. And so I think that's a very valuable piece that Republicans bring to that debate.
I think Caleb brought up a really good point that I think we need to touch back on. One of my first policies was Buy Washington. So talking about what is point source carbon emissions, it's really easy to take an industry, destroy it, and put it overseas, and then talk about how green we are when we continue to purchase that product. And I use the steel industry in the 90s as an example. There was a steel plant all along the West Coast, and that policy or that industry was shut down. Those were union jobs, tens of thousands of jobs, and they literally, and for an example on the record, took down those buildings, shipped them to China, and then started producing that product in China. Now, the innovation and the energy conservatism that was found, that was being used because, energy costs money. So there's always that innovation, as Caleb mentioned, to reduce your costs, and that money goes into labor, and you can increase your labor costs and pay good living wage jobs. And what happened is, it went overseas. We don't know about the social impacts of that, environmental impacts, and then we continue to purchase that product. And so Buy Washington really talks about making sure that we continue to protect those industries that we buy from that are produced here. We really need to make sure we look at some really innovative manufacturers in the state of Washington that are doing great things, that are doing it environmentally friendly. We have concrete, we have steel, we have recycling, inland pulp and paper. They're constantly innovating and really looking at, how to reduce costs and make sure they're doing it environmentally friendly. And some of it's most environmentally friendly in the world here. And so we really need to continue to protect those industries and make sure that we don't create environmental policy that hurts the environment.
Yeah, that goes right back to that nuance discussion that we were having, as well as the accountability that Caleb, you hit on. It's very obvious that we need to have the government involved in some way in protecting the environment, but it doesn't it shouldn't just sound good. It has to actually be good, and it has to be effective, and it has to be smart economically and smart environmentally. And the thing that you're touching on, Jacquelin, is that there are so many policies or ideas that sound really good on the outside, but the negative consequences on the back end far outweigh what sounds good. And whether that's exporting it across the globe or creating more mining into our earth. I mean, there's so many different things that can come up from these negative consequences that people don't think about. And I think as a party, what we can do is provide great alternatives like you guys just talked about, but also provide that accountability and say, okay, let's focus on environmental results, not environmental rhetoric. So because we're not great at the rhetoric yet as Republicans in this state or nationally on this issue, my generation often thinks of, and pretty much all young people think of the Republican Party as being anti-environment. We've talked about how that's not true with your personal stories, as well as some of the legacy makers in this state. But why should young people be skeptical of the stereotype of Republicans being anti-environment and listen to our ideas? Jesse, I'll start with you.
It's a great question. And I think I go back to my time when I worked on the Senate, and Senator Inhofe was the Republican chair of the Environment and Public Works Committee, or excuse me, the Environmental Committee there in the Senate. And he was a virulent climate change denier. And I think that has been sort of the legacy that Republicans have had, is sort of old white guys who say that this is not scientific and this isn't in fact true. And I think the biggest reason that the young people should be skeptical of sort of that stereotype going forward is that we need to stand for something as Republicans and not just against everything, right? So if you listen to Jacquelin, if you listen to Caleb talking about accountability and actually, driving for results, what a crazy concept. That should be our legacy, right? That should be what we strive for. And we say, hey, look, if you're a fiduciary, if you're a company that's working to improve efficiency and profit, you're going to become more efficient and reduce your waste and reduce the amount of wood that you need to produce to have timber. And so I think that there's just a whole host of things that we need to do. And I said it at the intro, and I'll say it again moving forward. We do need to kind of tweak our rhetoric a little bit. And, all of us talked about, why we want to protect our communities and make sure that we're passing on an environment better for our kids. And I think that we are doing a much better job of that moving forward. But I also think that we need to come up with, some ideas of our own and just help them. And it's unfortunate that some of them, have these grandiose titles like a grand Green New Deal. But I think that there's a lot of things that we can do that are practical, that make a whole lot of sense. And as Caleb said, we'll actually get some results, and we'll deliver results for our planet. And that's what we need to focus on moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Caleb, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think the couple thoughts I had on this one is, one, unfortunately, the media and the other side kind of uses the environment as a barrier to entry to try and chase young people away from the Republican Party. And I think I would take the question and kind of put the onus on us, on the party, on candidates, on our elected leadership. We have to talk about it. I mean, this is an issue that people care deeply about. And so we need to do more and be more proactive in getting that message out, that this is what Republicans believe, this is what we stand for, and really champion those policies, champion the innovation, champion the companies from Washington State, like Jacquelin was talking about in her own legislative district, and others across our state and across our country. We need to tell that story so that people feel welcome. I mean, that's kind of on us, that's on the party, that's on our candidates, that if there's 2/3 of the voting electorate cares deeply about an issue and is concerned about that issue, then we have to address it. And if we don't address it, then we deserve to lose those votes. And so I think that's kind of step one, is we've got to be talking about it. We've got to be campaigning on it. We've got to be getting that message out there. And so I certainly applaud Jacquelin, Jesse, and others. And you've seen, I mean, you could tell this story even better than most, Benji, but across the country, the battle for the future of our country, for the future of our state, is being decided in swing legislative districts in the suburbs. And Republicans that were winning in 2020 were talking about this issue in the way that we've all been describing, with real, practical, pragmatic solutions, and kind of addressing the issue as part of the campaign. It's a wedge issue that can win you votes. So
I think it's really important that when I first got elected, I was like, oh, the environment is very important to me. And somebody said, well, don't, that's a dirty word. Environmentalism is a dirty word. And it's because it's been weaponized against people. It's been weaponized against farmers who produce our food. And when they go away, and I can mention many industries in farming, it's produced in Brazil, or it's produced in South America, and we transport that now. And when we talk about carbon emissions, local farm production is closer. And so, a cow getting too close to a stream warrants a complete, shutdown of the cattle industry. And yet Seattle or King County dumps 400 million gallons of sewage out. And so you see this like inequity of environmental policy where a certain group has been attacked more or has suffered more just at the word. And so I think that when we start talking about environmental policy, we really need to start talking about really what is important for the environment and who's working really hard to keep it up. And when you spend decades attacking a certain group or a rural area and just keep focusing that negativity, you'll see that people will become sensitive to the words. They even lost their jobs. You really see some pretty serious issues that have occurred in the past because of that. So we kind of make sure that the whole idea, environmental policy, is not weaponized, but celebrated. We should be celebrating our local manufacturers that do the right thing, celebrate our local farmers, because we will continue to eat. We will continue to buy these products. We'll continue to build. It's just making sure that we do it the right way.
Well, I think on that note, one of the biggest takeaways from those three answers from my end is, in this state and nationally, we need to redefine what environmentalism is as conservatives. This needs to be the legacy of this generation of Republican leadership in Washington, needs to be redefining environmentalism and owning it, not backing away because environmentalism in the past couple of decades has hurt people, which it has, but taking that name, because conservatives are some of the best environmentalists out there, taking that name and that term and redefining it as ours and putting together policies and messaging and ideas behind that fit within our value set. I think that that's an incredible kind of takeaway from those three answers. But you also alluded to the problem that exists, which is that it has been weaponized. And, in the 1990s, over 90% of Americans consider themselves environmentalists. Today, that number has dropped to in the 60 percentiles because of this division that exists and the way that it has been weaponized. So Jacquelin, starting with you, probably better than anybody else whether this is possible. Do you think bipartisanship is possible on this issue in Washington? And what is the biggest barrier here?
Oh, absolutely. I think because you see these big, tax, schemes that have environment in them not really passing. And you see that the public doesn't want them. We voted against the, cap and trade, I believe 7 times on the ballot is my understanding. So, you really see that people go, whoa, we want to protect the environment, but we don't want, something that won't be effective, we won't see anything, occurring. And we're gonna have to pay a lot of money. Who is going to be benefiting financially? And there is a certain mistrust there, and the public doesn't want it. They voted against it 7 times for a reason. And so there is a bipartisan support for active solutions that don't hurt one group of people. So we have to make sure that we come together and have those conversations. But, just like you said, we have those huge policies that, end up taxing one group of people for a couple, close friends of another person. And you really see where the politics, where environmental policy that is benefiting the environment and another issue is occurring. And so if we could just get down to the conversation and really talk about forest health, like you mentioned, we all agree now about forest health. It used to be something that, Republicans only talked about, hey, if you continue to not go into that forest, it'll burn down. Well, we know it's okay. Well, it's burning down. And then, even in my district, we have a butterfly that's endangered. And I know I've been there. I've looked for this environmental habitat that's been protected, and part of it burned down. And so you see that the butterfly in my district that really needs the assistance of this habitat is not there because of the 2015 fire. That's important. That's a conversation that needs to be had. So now all of a sudden we're having that conversation. Okay, how do we fireproof these forests? Because we will lose these habitats and then we'll lose these species. And so now that is across the board conversation, that it's not just logging, it's not producing a product locally. Now it's fireproofing a forest for a habitat. And we can come together, but we really have to get back to those core values, and we really have to be specific.
That's an awesome answer. Caleb?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest obstacles is really it's the Democrats playing politics and trying to use this as an issue to kind of bludgeon Republicans with. And we saw this, unfortunately, it's kind of the way Governor Inslee operates on a lot of different issues. And even for the last year, it was around the reopening of our state. If you were a Republican and you wanted to reopen a business, you wanted grandma to die. Like, that was literally the response. And so if that's the debate, then it's impossible to have a discussion. And not to take a tangent, but last week I did a panel with Tina Podlodowski, the chair of the Democrats, and the Seattle Times wrote it up because she just attacked me the whole time. And it was like, if that's the approach that Democrats are going to have, is that Republicans don't get to have a voice on any issue to just try and silence us, then bipartisanship is impossible. And I don't think the voters of Washington State want that. So I think what we have to do is be creative. We have to find a way to communicate our ideas and really champion what the bills that our legislators are bringing forward, even when Democrat-controlled committees might not give them a hearing, even when Democrat leadership won't give them a vote. We have to tell that story of, this is what Republicans are doing. This is how Republicans are standing up for this important issue for their own constituents, and then also for our candidates. I think I saw Mark James on here up in Marysville, who I hope runs again in the 44th. But being able to talk about a Republican environmental solution for people in the suburbs of the 44th legislative district, and making that kind of a part of our campaign vernacular and how we're appealing to voters. So I know that was kind of all over the place, but bottom line, we've got work to do. And unfortunately, oftentimes the Democrats are not willing to work with us because they're prioritizing political wins over the environment. And so we have to kind of tell that story as well and get that out there.
Well, briefly, I'll just kind of pile on. I think Jacquelin and Caleb put it very well. I see it as absolutism, right? Specifically when it comes to the policy front at a federal level. The left, and it's certainly the case in Washington State, where Jay Inslee is paying $750,000 to have a study on removing federal dams, which the state has no influence over that decision-making process, literally taking $750,000 of Washington State taxpayers' money and lighting it on fire. Hydropower is a zero emission power. And, I think I've heard you, Benji, talk about how, speaking of weaponizing things, that has become just a dirty word in the left. And you wonder about bipartisanship. And I think you look no further than the Yakima River Basin Integrated Plan in the 8th Congressional District that brought together fishermen, recreationalists, farmers, environmentalists, and they all sat at a table and they came up with a solution. You should have recreational access to these rivers. You should have access to senior and junior water rights, right? And hey, let's create a helix structure, a fish elevator, if you will, right? And backward streams to ensure that our salmon can get into the Columbia River. And if you look at the Lake Cle Elum Dam, you can see that we have as many as 300,000 coho salmon going back out to the sound. There was just a report that stated that the resident orcas actually also coho salmon if they can't get access to Chinook salmon. So again, there is that nuance that you talked about earlier on, where you can have a healthy orca population, you can have a zero emission, highly efficient energy production source of a dam. And no, you don't need to spend $900 million to tear out these dams, which, like, just like Jacquelin said, you're going to be creating more carbon. What are you doing? This is crazy, right? And so we need to Caleb's point, make that point. And I think we have a real opportunity because of people like Tina who refuse to have the conversation and just, bludgeon people to death and say, hey, if you disagree with me, you're a fascist or pick whatever word, you're anti-environmental. We can have these rational conversations. I think people are ready for it. And it's up to us as candidates, as elected officials, and as advocates to do so.
Well, it's a really good point. And I would also say, and add on to that, that I think one of the other barriers to this has been because of that reaction from the left of center space, which it's largely been nothing is ever good enough, or, you might be okay on this issue, but our side is better. That has left conservatives in a place where they're actually doing the opposite of what they should do, which is running the other way and saying the wrong things. And instead of leaning in, they're leaning away. And so one of the questions, and I actually would love to just get to questions right away because we have so many questions, we're going to need some like rapid fire answers, which is usually how these conversations go. Really good questions already. One of the questions is from Bill, and he says, we all seem to agree that we need to change the environmental face of the Republican Party, but what can be done to change the environmental face of the Republican Party when there are so many Republicans who are still so easily dismissed as climate change deniers and anti-environmentalists? And I'll add a caveat on that. Partially that's because a lot of the Republicans have identified as that. So how can we kind of change that? And how can we change the face of the Republican Party from being that when we're always dismissed as that way? How can we play the offensive role on that? Jesse, you go first.
Yeah, I think it's about bridging the divide. And I think it just takes one or two folks to have these really policy-driven conversations. And, Jacquelin has done that today on this panel several times. And I applaud you, Madam Representative, for doing so, right? And taking the fight to the other side. I think what we need to do is we need to have a couple conversations and say, hey, look, like if you're a social conservative, I said this at the top of the hour, you can talk about being a good steward of the earth. Jesus Christ talked about that, and he's a pretty good guy. Let's follow him, right? If you're a fiscal conservative, you could do the same thing. And so I think it's less about it, when you're in a debate, you never assume the preposition of the opponent's argument, right? The left has put us into a box where it's either a binary choice. You're either for the Green New Deal or you're a climate denier. That's malarkey, right? There's a million miles in between those two positions. And if you talk about specific issues and you're informed on the issues, I think you can have huge impacts and really change the perception. And by the way, get stuff done.
Absolutely, Caleb.
Yeah, no, I would mostly, I agree with that. I think it's really a challenge for candidate recruitment. You need candidates that fit the community, and finding people that can talk about issues in a way that engages with their legislative district. And that, as I said before, what's separating us from the majority and having Jacquelin as a committee chair and other Republicans in leadership is suburban legislative districts. And so when we're running in these competitive suburban legislative districts, it's finding candidates that represent the values of their community and can talk appropriately and kind of connect on the issues that matter to that community. So I think practically some of what that looks like is candidate training, connecting with our candidates and getting them in a room with Jacquelin and talking about what have Republicans been doing on these issues in Olympia. And here's some kind of model legislation that we can talk about when you're in a forum, when you're knocking on doors, when you're getting your message out. I saw in a lot of the questions which is the reality. Like in Washington State, the media is not on our side and we get outspent 3-1. Like that's just what we're up against. So for Republicans to win, we just have to overcome that. And I think the way we overcome that is as Benji said, is lean into those issues where we can win people over, where we can peel voters to our side. And we do a good job of that. I mean, in general, Republican legislative candidates are outperforming the top of the ticket, either statewide or at the national level. And I think this is a kind of an opportunity to continue to do that, to lean in and appeal to Biden voters, but get them to vote for Republicans at the legislative level, which is our path to the majority and to relevance in Washington State.
I'm about to, I just saw the next question, Kate or Benji. So you ask that next question, I'll answer all of this in one.
Which question are you talking about?
Low carbon fuel
Oh,
standard.
yes. Okay. So we did get 2 questions on the low carbon fuel standard. So I'm going to ask the more in-depth one too, which is really fun to read. Is the low carbon fuel standard program a good fit for Washington State? Should the Senate pass House or HB 1091 and have the highest gas tax? What is the conservative or better fit to reduce our carbon footprint?
I love this question because I love the idea of the low carbon fuel standard, having this conversation. The low carbon fuel standard is so you're looking at an oil that is an additive that is added to your fuel. This is where the points versus carbon emissions really talks about how do you feel, right? Do you feel really good about the low carbon fuel standard? Because everybody wants to reduce their emissions. There is nobody on the planet that wants to increase their emissions. The problem is that the low carbon fuel standard is an oil that is produced either overseas or in South America. Now, in retrospect, cutting down the rainforest to plant sugarcane in another country is not really environmentally friendly. However, the index shows that if you put it in your vehicles, it'll be okay, is what I was told. So I had 2 amendments that are very important to me. One of those saying you cannot cut down the rainforest to plant anything for the low carbon fuel standard, and nor can we purchase it on the open market. That amendment did not pass. Why did not that amendment pass? Because it's not about the environment. If it was about the environment, that amendment would be the first one to pass, because the most important thing that we have on Earth right now is our rainforest. Why would we destroy the rainforest to make us feel better in Washington State? It's not about the environment. So my second amendment was not to allow child labor. Now, I want to define child labor under the US Department of Labor Statistics is from the ages of 5 to 14. Do not use child labor when harvesting these oils. That amendment failed. It failed on party lines. I am still at shock that that amendment didn't fail, because it's not about the children that would be harvesting. By the way, if you go to the US statistics of the Department of Labor, that the sugar cane in Brazil that will be used on the low carbon fuel standard is harvested with child and forced labor. That is a red market product. And I would like to tell you that is kind of a big deal. As I came home tonight, my children said, somebody had bought something and put it on the table. My kid said, those use child labor. That's something that you can educate anybody. And my kid's 7 and 11, and they knew that. So why are we as Washingtonians accepting the cutting down of the rainforest and child labor? And the answer of the debate, and please look it up, the rebuttal was, my children in Seattle had to wear a mask when there was a forest fire. The answer is, it's okay to allow children in forced labor to harvest this product for us, ship it across the world, leaving an oil streak in the ocean, or driving it all the way to Washington State. So we can pat ourselves on the back and say that we have the highest gas tax in Washington State. This is where the mistrust comes from. This is where the anger comes from, because it's not about the environment. You make this a domestic product, you make this a feedstock product, you made this something in Washington State or close in America, hey, we're all for it, but it's not. And that gas tax prices doesn't come from the product cost. That price has to do with buying and selling credits that aren't defined. So as long as you're on the good list to purchase those products or those credits for innovation, then you'll get that money. So that's on the backs of people trying to feed themselves. The cost of food will skyrocket because red fuel was not eliminated from the costs. So now you're talking about feeding families and not actually helping the environment when you actually factor in point source emissions. So I'm a little emotional about this issue and have been working on this issue for many years. Make it domestic, make it not fought for by children suffering, and maybe we can have a conversation about environmental policy.
Well, I think we all wish right about now that Jacquelin was our governor. So which one of you two gentlemen wants to follow that?
Well, I could take a swing, and I think that Jacquelin did a fantastic job describing it. I think one of the things that Caleb mentioned earlier is what are the outcomes of this? You look at E85 ethanol. And ethanol was a big push when I was in the Senate working for a member, and you see feed prices going up, and then you see the cost of beef and everything else that uses corn to feed cattle goes up. That's an unintended consequence. What's the benefit of using E85 to reduce carbon emissions? Does it outweigh the increased costs, right? And so I think that there's just a whole host of things that can be done and that need to be done. But again, looking at sort of the cost benefit analysis, does increasing the cost of gas really reduce emissions? Or would we be better off reducing some red tape or creating some incentive for further electrification of industrial fleets, or reducing the carbon emissions that come out of cement production, right? I think that which is 50% of all carbon emissions from energy use come from the creation of cement that we use in infrastructure projects. So there's a lot of better avenues that could be pursued and other ideas. But again, I think that we need to come to the table with forward-looking ideas and with things that can actually cause real good, and not just be the reactionary party of no. And that's tough. And I think that we need platforms that speak to that, and we need more informed candidates on the Republican side that can do that.
It's a wonderful point. Caleb, any other thoughts there?
I think they covered that one pretty well.
All right. Well, I think one of the other great questions that's here that kind of is a good kind of counterbalance to that last question is, why do you believe, this is from Jan, why do you believe that the environmental communities partner with Democrats? And have you reached out to your environmental community to discuss their perception of the local and state Republican Party? I'm going to be a bad moderator and answer this last, but I want to let you guys answer that too. Caleb, I'll let you go first since you didn't answer the last one, because Jacquelin just knocked it out of the park so well.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things, I'll take from this, I think we can do a better job of trying to reach out and attempting to build bridges, and I'm all for that. And so I will definitely take that. So thank you for that question, Jan. One of the factors in that is that these groups have also been weaponized, and they've become part of the Democrat machine. You look at Washington conservation voters, they were dumping money on Jay Inslee and spending it against Bill Bryant, who was a very pro-environmental candidate. So unfortunately, these groups that claim to care about the environment are basically have become entities of the Democratic Party, of the left-wing political machine. And so that's unfortunate. I think we have to still try and engage with them. And as the last kind of plug, it's why I'm so grateful for Benji and his group kind of engaging and creating a group that's focused on that from the conservative perspective, because we need to have that kind of a counterbalance, counterweight at times to a radical left-wing organization. If they're not willing to actually put the environment first, if they're putting partisan politics first, then it's helpful to have somebody that's actually caring about results, somebody like Benji that's out there.
Thanks, Caleb. Jesse?
Yeah, I'll just pile on and say to Caleb's point, I had a lot of success at the door, just talking to voters and asking them what are the important issues to you. And the environment came up quite a bit when I was talking to folks. And I will tell you that we did knock on doors during COVID-19. We wore masks, we were socially distanced, right? And we got overwhelmingly positive response from people. So again, it's just sort of this conception of, sort of you're absolute, you shouldn't knock on doors, you shouldn't, talk to people. When you do, and you take it to them, and you take it to the individual person, because I mean, this is tantamount to comparing the Latino voting bloc to being either Republican or Democrat. This is such a myriad of people with different perspectives, different backgrounds, different things that are important to them. You really do need to treat every single voter individually and answer their questions. And again, if you can come forward with one of servant leadership, of putting others above yourself, of putting the environment and putting your country, ask not what you can do for your country, but what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Again, I think that JFK would be a Republican today, by the way, that you can really have a lot of impact, and these things, you can really affect change.
Jacquelin?
A couple of years ago, I walked into a fundraiser, and it's an environmental program that I, really care about. And you could have heard a pin drop because they knew who I was, unfortunately. And someone came up to me in the environmental community and said, "Do you know you're a Republican?" And I said, "Yes. This means a lot to me, and I've probably been involved much longer than you have." And I think I shocked them. And I think having those conversations where we talk about, areas that are important to us, or nonprofit groups that are, doing great things for the environment, that we get involved. We've kind of forgot to continue to get involved and get into these groups. And that means a lot. Republicans are very independent. And as independent people, we frequently forget to get together with other people. And that is our spirit. That is our way of handling things. But getting involved in these groups, and these nonprofits, and these environmental groups that are doing great things, sometimes can turn them around for the better. And having those conversations that, yeah, I agree with this and probably will do everything I can to protect it. All of a sudden, you're making friends in a room that, would never have looked twice towards you. So, that's just the first step.
Absolutely. And I think one of the main threads there is that there's also a wide range of environmental groups in this state and across the country. There are those who are using this as a political weapon, and those who are doing incredible work. And you've seen that here. You've seen environmental groups threaten conservatives with their lives, including members of my board, just because they perceive them as the enemy. You also have, environmental groups here in the state that lean left that are incredibly good at working across the aisle and finding common sense solutions in the state. So it really just does depend on the organization. But when a Bill Bryant or a Mike Vasca or others run for office and they have served on the boards of these organizations, and then they don't get the support, their opponent gets endorsed, that's not looking at things objectively. That is putting partisan politics over the environment. And that is too often the case here in Washington State. And that's why it's time for conservatives to lead. So I'm incredibly happy and honored to have spent this hour with these three incredible panelists. I know people are going to be dropping off now because it's about 7 o'clock, but this is going to be the conservative issue of this century. This is going to be the one that we own, and it's going to be the three panelists here and many others that are going to leave another incredible legacy like the one that Dan Evans, Ralph Monroe, Dave Reichert, others have left on this state. This is just the beginning, and I'm super honored to have spent, again, this hour. We're going to do a lot more at Mainstream to provide information about how Republicans have led on this in the past, are doing it currently, and are going to do it going forward. You can also check out ACC, our organization, at acc.eco. Both organizations are working in tandem to make this a priority and a reality. And I can't thank the panelists here enough, as well as those who joined us this evening. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.